Marcus Chen had always known that first contact would change everything. What he hadn't expected was for it to happen in his backyard while he was grilling burgers on a Tuesday evening. The sleek silver vessel descended silently from the clouds, its hull reflecting the setting sun like liquid mercury. No dramatic entrance, no thunderous roar of engines, just the quiet hum of technology far beyond human understanding. His golden retriever, Bailey, had been the first to notice. The dog's ears perked up, his tail wagging with the innocent excitement that only a dog could muster when faced with the unknown. While Marcus stood frozen, spatula in hand, watching beings emerge from the craft, Bailey bounded forward with typical canine enthusiasm. The aliens were tall, perhaps 8 feet in height, with elongated limbs and skin that shimmered between blue and purple depending on the angle of light. Their faces were angular, almost crystalline, with large eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. They moved with a fluid grace that made Marcus think of underwater creatures, each step deliberate and measured. Bailey, completely oblivious to the historical significance of the moment, approached the lead alien with his tail wagging furiously. The being knelt down, extending what Marcus assumed was a hand, though it had too many fingers and joints that bent in impossible directions. Bailey sniffed, then licked the alien appendage, causing the creature to emit a sound that might have been laughter. Marcus finally found his voice. "Can I help you?" he called out, immediately feeling ridiculous for using such mundane words during humanity's first contact with an extraterrestrial species. The lead alien's head turned toward him with mechanical precision. When it spoke, the words formed directly in Marcus's mind rather than through his ears, a sensation both intimate and deeply unsettling. "Greetings. Human designation Marcus Chen. We are the Vorthak Collective. We have observed your species for several of your rotations around your star. We come seeking specimens for our biological research archives." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Specimens?" "Your companion creature displays fascinating neural patterns. Loyalty, emotional attachment, protective instincts, qualities we find intriguing. We require samples for study." Bailey continued to wag his tail, now rolling onto his back to allow the alien to scratch his belly. The sight would have been endearing if not for the growing dread in Marcus's chest. "You can't just take my dog," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "He's not a specimen. He's family." The alien's large eyes seemed to grow even darker. "Your emotional attachment is noted but irrelevant. The creature will serve a greater purpose in advancing universal biological understanding." Other Vorthak moved around Bailey, producing devices that hummed and clicked. Strange lights played over the dog's fur, and Bailey's tail wagged even harder, interpreting the attention as an elaborate petting session. Marcus stepped forward. "Wait, you don't understand. Dogs aren't just animals to humans. They're companions, friends, family members. You can't just—" The lead Vorthak raised its multi-jointed hand, and Marcus found himself unable to move, his muscles locked in place by some invisible force. "Your primitive emotional responses are expected but will not interfere with our research objectives." Bailey was now surrounded by a shimmering field of energy. The dog looked back at Marcus with trusting brown eyes, still wagging his tail even as he was lifted gently into the air. Marcus strained against the paralysis, his voice the only thing he could still control. "Please, you don't know what you're doing. Dogs and humans have a bond that goes back thousands of years. You're not just taking an animal. You're tearing apart a relationship that's fundamental to what makes us human." The Vorthak paused, its head tilting slightly. "Elaborate on this bond." Marcus seized the opportunity, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Dogs were wolves once. Wild predators. But humans and wolves found each other, helped each other survive. Over thousands of years we evolved together. Dogs learned to read human emotions, to anticipate our needs. We learned to love unconditionally through them. They're not just pets. They're evidence of humanity's capacity for connection across species." The alien's eyes seemed to shimmer with something that might have been interest. "You claim interspecies symbiosis?" "More than that," Marcus pressed. "Dogs die for humans. Humans die for dogs. We've changed each other at a genetic level through our bond. Service dogs help disabled humans navigate the world. Therapy dogs provide emotional healing. Working dogs help us hunt, farm, protect our homes. They're woven into the fabric of human civilization." Bailey, still floating in the energy field, whined softly, the first sign that he might be feeling distressed. The sound cut through Marcus like a physical blow. The lead Vorthak exchanged rapid communications with its companions in sounds that registered as static in Marcus's mind. Finally, it turned back to him. Your claims are unexpected. We had classified your species as primitive based on your technological development. However, if what you describe is accurate, the relationship between humans and these creatures represents a form of biological cooperation we have not previously encountered. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Then you understand why you can't take him? On the contrary, the alien replied, and Marcus's heart sank. This makes the specimen infinitely more valuable. We must study not only the creature, but the biological and psychological mechanisms that enable this alleged bond. The research potential is extraordinary. The energy field around Bailey intensified, and the dog was drawn toward the spacecraft. Bailey's distressed whining grew louder, and he looked back at Marcus with confused, frightened eyes that seemed to ask why his human wasn't helping him. Wait, Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. If you take him, you'll destroy the very thing you want to study. The bond only exists because we're together. Separate us and you'll have nothing but a confused, frightened animal. But the Vorthak were already retreating toward their vessel, Bailey floating along with them in his glowing prison. The lead alien's voice echoed in Marcus's mind one final time. Your concern is noted but irrelevant. We have methods to preserve and study biological relationships that are beyond your understanding. The specimen will be well maintained. The spacecraft's hull opened like flowing water, and Bailey disappeared inside. The last thing Marcus saw was his dog's brown eyes, wide with confusion and fear, looking back at him as the opening sealed shut. The paralysis released the moment the craft lifted off, and Marcus collapsed to his knees in his backyard, staring up at the silver vessel as it accelerated toward the stars. The evening air was filled with the smell of burning burgers forgotten on the grill, and the silence left behind by the absence of jingling dog tags and happy panting. Marcus had no way of knowing that this moment would mark the beginning of something that would echo across the galaxy. He couldn't know that Bailey's theft would become the catalyst for humanity's first and most devastating act of interstellar warfare. All he knew was that his best friend was gone, taken by beings who saw love as nothing more than an interesting biological phenomenon to be studied and catalogued. As the spacecraft vanished among the stars, Marcus made a promise to the empty sky. He would get Bailey back no matter what it took. Dr. Sarah Okafor had seen some strange things during her 15 years as a xenobiologist, but nothing had prepared her for the footage that appeared on every major news network 3 days after the Chen incident. The video, captured by a neighbor's security camera, showed clear evidence of alien contact and alien theft. Within hours of the footage going viral, Sarah found herself on a military transport, heading to a facility that officially didn't exist. The extraterrestrial contact protocol had been activated for the first time in human history, and every expert in relevant fields was being quietly assembled. The facility, buried deep beneath the Nevada desert, buzzed with activity. Scientists, military officials, linguists, and psychologists moved through corridors with the controlled urgency of people who knew they were living through history. Sarah was escorted to a briefing room where Marcus Chen sat at a metal table, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Mr. Chen, said General Patricia Hawkins, a stern woman with silver hair and intense green eyes. This is Dr. Okafor. She specializes in animal behavior and interspecies relationships. We need you to tell her everything you remember about the alien's interest in your dog. Marcus looked up with bloodshot eyes. They called Bailey a specimen, said they wanted to study the bond between humans and dogs. They acted like it was some kind of scientific curiosity they'd never seen before. Sarah leaned forward. They specifically mentioned the bond? The lead alien seemed fascinated when I told them about how humans and dogs evolved together. But then it said that made Bailey even more valuable for research. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. They took him because of our connection, not despite it. General Hawkins activated a holographic display showing the captured spacecraft's trajectory. Satellite tracking lost them about 4 hours after departure. They're gone, heading to unknown coordinates in deep space. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead physicist on the project, spoke up from across the table. The propulsion system they used is beyond our current understanding. Whatever technology they possess, it's centuries ahead of ours. Maybe millennia. Sarah studied Marcus carefully. Tell me about Bailey. What made him special? Marcus managed a weak smile. He wasn't special in any fancy way. He was just Bailey. 3 years old, loved everyone he met, always knew when I was having a bad day. He'd bring me his toys when I was sick, sleep by my bed during thunderstorms even though he was scared too. He was my running partner, my best friend. His voice hardened. He trusted those aliens because he trusts all living things. That's what made him perfect for their sick research. Dr. James Wright, the team's computer scientist, looked up from his tablet. We've been analyzing the alien communication patterns from the security footage. Their language seems to be partially telepathic, but there are also electromagnetic signatures we can track. If we can decode their communication protocols, we might be able to locate them. General Hawkins nodded. How long would that take? Months, maybe years. Their technology is so advanced that we're essentially trying to understand calculus when we're still learning basic addition. Sarah had been quiet, processing everything she'd heard. Finally, she spoke. General, I think we're approaching this wrong. Explain. Everyone's focusing on the technology gap, but we're missing something crucial. These aliens, the Vorthak, they don't understand the human-dog bond. To them, it's just an interesting biological phenomenon, but they're about to learn something they didn't expect. Marcus looked up. What do you mean? Sarah stood and began pacing. They took Bailey thinking they could study him like a lab specimen. But Bailey isn't just any dog. He's a dog who's bonded with a human. Remove him from that context and you're not studying the relationship anymore. You're studying trauma, Dr. Vasquez frowned. I don't follow. Dogs who are separated from their human families don't just get sad. They can develop severe behavioral problems. Depression, aggression, self-harm. Bailey's entire world revolved around Marcus. Now he's trapped in an alien environment, surrounded by beings who smell wrong, sound wrong, feel wrong. He's probably terrified. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. You think he's suffering? Sarah's expression was grave. I think he's experiencing psychological trauma that these aliens aren't equipped to understand or treat. They wanted to study the bond, but what they're actually going to see is what happens when that bond is violently severed. General Hawkins leaned back in her chair. And that helps us how? Because they're scientists, Sarah continued. They took Bailey for research purposes. But if their research subject is deteriorating, failing to exhibit the behaviors they wanted to study, they're going to need to figure out why. Dr. Wright looked up excitedly. They might try to contact us for information. Or, Sarah said grimly, they might decide their specimen is defective and dispose of it. Marcus shot to his feet. We have to do something. We can't just sit here and wait. General Hawkins raised a hand. Mr. Chen, I understand your frustration, but we're dealing with beings who can cross interstellar space while our fastest rockets can barely reach Mars. We need to be smart about this. Sarah had an idea forming. What if we don't wait for them to contact us? What if we contact them? The room fell silent. Dr. Vasquez shook her head. We don't have their communication frequencies, their location, or even the basic technology to reach them. But we have something they want, Sarah pressed. Information about the very thing they're trying to study. They took Bailey to understand the human-dog bond, but they're probably discovering that they can't study it without understanding human psychology too. Marcus's eyes lit up with the first hope Sarah had seen from him. You mean we could trade information about Bailey for Bailey? It's possible, but first we need to make contact. Sarah turned to Dr. Wright. You said their communications have electromagnetic signatures? Yes, but could we broadcast on those frequencies? Send a message they'd recognize as intentional communication? Dr. Wright was quiet for a moment, his fingers flying over his tablet. Theoretically, yes. We'd need to use the Arecibo replacement array, boost the signal with every satellite dish we can commandeer. But the power requirements would be enormous and we'd be broadcasting blind. General Hawkins stood up. Dr. Okafor, you're suggesting we announce to potentially hostile aliens that we want to negotiate? I'm suggesting we announce to alien scientists that we have critical information about their research subject, that they need to conduct their study properly. Marcus stepped forward. What kind of information? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed them a video of Bailey from Marcus's social media. In it, the golden retriever was performing a complex series of tricks, responding to subtle hand signals and voice commands, his tail wagging the entire time. This kind of information. The Vorthak saw Bailey for maybe 10 minutes. They have no idea how intelligent dogs actually are, how complex their emotional lives are, how deeply they bond with humans. They probably think they can study him like they would any other animal. She swiped to another video. Bailey comforting Marcus during what was clearly a difficult day, resting his head on Marcus's lap and refusing to move until his human felt better. But Bailey isn't just any animal. He's the product of thousands of years of coevolution with humans. His behavior patterns, his emotional responses, his very biology has been shaped by that relationship. Without understanding human psychology, human culture, human history, they can't understand Bailey at all. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. You think they'll trade him back for information? I think they'll realize they need human cooperation to conduct their research properly. And once we establish communication, once we're talking instead of just being victims of their theft, Sarah's expression hardened. Then we can start making demands. General Hawkins was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Wright, how quickly can you set up this communication array? Give me 48 hours and authorization to commandeer every radio telescope on the planet. Done. Dr. Okafor, start preparing a message. Something that demonstrates our knowledge about dog behavior and makes it clear we have information they need. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm. You really think this could work? Sarah looked at the desperate hope in his eyes and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. I think it's Bailey's best chance. But Marcus, you need to understand, even if we make contact, even if they're willing to negotiate, there's no guarantee this ends well. Marcus's jaw set with determination. Then we make sure it does. Bailey trusted those aliens because he trusts everyone. Maybe it's time they learned what happens when you betray that trust. As the team dispersed to begin their preparations, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to set something in motion that would change humanity's place in the universe forever. The Vorthak had stolen a dog thinking they were conducting a simple biological study. They were about to discover they had kidnapped a member of a species that would cross the galaxy for their family. The communication array came online at exactly 2:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 days after Bailey's disappearance. Every major radio telescope on Earth had been linked together, creating the most powerful directed signal in human history. Dr. Wright's fingers hovered over the transmission controls as the assembled team held their breath. Signal strength optimal, Wright reported. Broadcasting on the Vorthak frequencies we extrapolated from the contact event. Sarah stepped up to the microphone, her carefully prepared message ready. But as she looked at Marcus, who hadn't left the facility since arriving, she made a spontaneous decision. Marcus should send the first part, she said. General Hawkins frowned. Dr. Okafor, we agreed you would handle communications. The message needs to be authentic. They took Bailey because of his bond with Marcus. They need to hear from Marcus directly. Marcus looked terrified. I don't know what to say to aliens. Don't talk to aliens, Sarah advised gently. Talk to Bailey. They'll be listening. Marcus nodded slowly and stepped up to the microphone. His voice was rough with emotion as he began. Bailey, if you can hear this, I want you to know I'm coming for you. I know you're scared, buddy. I know nothing makes sense right now. But you're not alone, okay? I'm not giving up on you. He paused, collecting himself. To the beings who took him, my name is Marcus Chen. You stole my dog because you wanted to study our bond. But you can't study something you don't understand. You can't learn about love by keeping us apart. Sarah stepped forward and took over the microphone. This is Dr. Sarah Okafor, xenobiologist Earth. Your research subject is exhibiting behavioral deterioration because you've removed him from his essential environmental context. Bailey's psychology is fundamentally linked to human interaction. Without it, you're not studying a human-bonded canine, you're studying trauma responses. The signal broadcast into space, carrying human voices toward an unknown destination. For 23 minutes, they transmitted everything they'd prepared. Videos of dog behavior, explanations of human-canine coevolution, detailed descriptions of how separation anxiety manifests in domesticated dogs. Then they waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. The radio telescopes listened to cosmic background radiation, while the team took shifts monitoring for any response. Marcus barely slept, barely ate, spending most of his time staring at the communication equipment as if he could will it to receive a reply. On the 4th day, Dr. Wright's console lit up with activity. We're getting something, he announced, his voice tight with excitement. Same electromagnetic signature as the original contact event, but the signal's much stronger. The speakers crackled to life, and the familiar sound of the Vorthak telepathic communication filled the room. The lead alien's voice formed directly in their minds, just as it had in Marcus's backyard. Human designation Marcus Chen. We have received your transmissions. Your claims about the specimen's deteriorating condition are accurate. Marcus grabbed the microphone. Is Bailey okay? Let me talk to him. The specimen has exhibited concerning behavioral patterns since acquisition. Refusal to consume provided nutrition. Repetitive vocalizations. Apparent distress responses when approached by research personnel. We had not anticipated these reactions. Sarah took the microphone. That's because you removed him from his bonded partner. Dogs are not solitary creatures when they formed human attachments. Bailey's behavior is a normal response to what he perceives as abandonment. Your information suggests that effective study of this biological relationship requires cooperation between species? Exactly. You can't study a partnership by destroying it. If you want to understand the human-dog bond, you need both the human and the dog in their natural state. There was a long pause before the Vorthak responded. This presents complications for our research parameters. Marcus couldn't contain himself any longer. Just give him back. You've learned what you needed to learn, that you can't understand us by taking us apart. Return of the specimen is not acceptable. However, your argument about cooperative study has merit. We propose an alternative. General Hawkins stepped forward and spoke into the microphone. What kind of alternative? You will join your companion creature aboard our research vessel. Both subjects will be studied in their natural interactive state. This will provide optimal research conditions while maintaining the psychological stability of both specimens. The room erupted in argument. General Hawkins was shouting about protocol violations. Dr. Vasquez was calculating the impossibility of human survival on an alien vessel, and Dr. Wright was frantically taking notes. But Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. I'll do it. Everyone fell silent. Sarah stared at him in shock. Marcus, you can't be serious. They're offering to let me be with Bailey. To protect him. I'm not letting him stay alone and scared while we debate. You'd be putting yourself at the mercy of beings we know nothing about. General Hawkins protested. They could kill you, experiment on you, or worse. Marcus's expression was resolute. Bailey didn't choose to be taken. But I can choose to go to him. That's what the bond means. We don't abandon each other. Sarah felt a chill of admiration and terror. Marcus, think about this rationally. We don't know their intentions, their capabilities, or even if you'd survive the journey. I know Bailey's alone and afraid. That's enough, the Vorthak voice returned. Your decision, Marcus Chen. But Sarah had an idea. Wait, you said you wanted to study the bond in its natural state. But taking Marcus aboard your ship isn't natural either. You'd still be studying the relationship under artificial conditions. Explain. The human-dog bond evolved on Earth, in human environments, within human social structures. If you really want to understand it, you need to observe it where it naturally occurs. Marcus caught on immediately. She's right. You can't study us properly in a lab. You need to see how Bailey and I interact in our normal environment with our normal routines. You propose we return the specimen to your planet? Sarah pressed her advantage. We propose you return Bailey and establish a proper research station on Earth. Study multiple human-dog pairs in their natural habitats. Observe the full spectrum of the relationship. Working dogs, service dogs, therapy animals, family pets. You'll learn more in a month of Earth-based observation than you could in years of laboratory study. The pause was longer this time. The team could almost hear the alien consultation happening across the void of space. Your proposal has scientific merit. However, it would require significant modification of our research protocols. Extended presence in your planetary system would be necessary. General Hawkins looked alarmed. Are you talking about establishing a permanent alien presence on Earth? Temporary research station. Orbital platform with observational capabilities. Direct surface contact only as required for data collection. Sarah realized they had stumbled onto something extraordinary. You're talking about formal contact between our species. If your claims about the complexity of human-canine relationships are accurate, yes. This research would require unprecedented cooperation between the Vorthak Collective and human civilization. Marcus gripped the microphone. And Bailey comes home? The original specimen would be returned as part of the expanded study. However, this arrangement requires approval from your planetary leadership. We cannot establish research protocols without official cooperation from your governing structures. General Hawkins took the microphone with shaking hands. How long do we have to arrange this approval? Your companion creature's psychological state continues to deteriorate. We estimate optimal research conditions require reunification within 7 of your solar rotations. 7 days. They had 1 week to convince the governments of Earth to approve humanity's first formal alien research partnership, all to save one dog named Bailey. As the communication ended and the room buzzed with frantic planning, Marcus sat down heavily in a chair. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. You realize what just happened? She asked quietly. Marcus looked up with exhausted eyes. We got Bailey a chance to come home? More than that. You just negotiated humanity's first interstellar treaty because you refused to abandon your dog. Marcus managed a weak smile. Bailey always was good at bringing people together. I guess that includes entire species. As the team dispersed to begin the impossible task of coordinating global approval for alien contact, none of them could have predicted that this moment would later be remembered as the turning point when humanity stepped onto the galactic stage, not through technological achievement or military conquest, but through the simple, powerful act of refusing to abandon a friend. The Vorthak had stolen a dog for research. They were about to discover they had inadvertently initiated the most important diplomatic contact in human history. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council was unlike anything in the organization's history. World leaders sat around the familiar circular table, but the stakes had transcended anything humanity had previously faced. On the main screen, a live feed showed Marcus Chen, Dr. Sarah Okafor, and General Hawkins presenting their case for approving the Vorthak research proposal. Secretary General Maria Santos looked exhausted as she addressed the assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, we are being asked to approve the establishment of an alien research station in Earth orbit. The justification is the return of a stolen pet dog. President Jennifer Walsh of the United States leaned forward. With respect, Madam Secretary General, that's an oversimplification. These aliens have demonstrated technology centuries beyond our capabilities. They could destroy us, ignore us, or study us like insects. Instead, they're asking for permission. That suggests something significant about their intentions. Prime Minister David Clark of the United Kingdom shook his head. It also suggests they need something from us. The question is what, and at what cost? Dr. Okafor's voice came through the speakers clearly. If I may address that concern, the Vorthak appear to be genuinely scientific in their approach. They've acknowledged that their original methods were flawed and are seeking to correct their research parameters. This suggests intellectual honesty and adaptability. President Chen Wei of China spoke up. Dr. Okafor, what guarantee do we have that this research won't evolve into something more invasive? How do we know they won't decide to study humans directly? Sarah's response was measured. We don't have guarantees, Mr. President, but we do have leverage. They want our cooperation for their research. That means they need us to be willing participants, not coerced subjects. Chancellor Emma Mueller of Germany frowned. But the precedent this sets is troubling. If we agree to this, what stops other alien species from making similar demands? Do we become a galactic research station? Marcus's voice cut through the debate, raw with emotion. Bailey has been gone for 8 days. Every moment we spend talking is another moment he's trapped and terrified on that ship. You're debating political implications while my best friend is suffering. President Santos of Brazil looked uncomfortable. Mr. Chen, we understand your personal investment in this situation, but we must consider the implications for all of humanity. Then consider this, Marcus replied, his voice growing stronger. Bailey was taken because of his bond with me. But dogs don't just bond with their individual owners, they bond with human communities. Every military working dog, every service animal, every therapy dog, every family pet represents the same relationship the Vorthak want to study. This isn't just about one dog, it's about understanding what makes us human. General Hawkins stepped forward. If I may add a strategic perspective, the Vorthak have offered something unprecedented. They're proposing limited, controlled contact with advance notice and our explicit approval. This is first contact on our terms, not theirs. Prime Minister Yamamoto of Japan raised his hand. What are the specific terms of this research arrangement? Dr. Wright's voice joined the transmission. The Vorthak would establish an orbital research station approximately 35,000 kilometers above Earth. They would observe human canine interactions from orbit and request permission for specific ground-based observations. All contact would be coordinated through Earth authorities. President Walsh looked intrigued. They're asking for our permission for each interaction? Yes, ma'am. They've acknowledged that effective research requires cooperative subjects. Forced observation would compromise their data. Chancellor Mueller leaned back in her chair. And what do they offer in return, besides returning Mr. Chen's dog? Sarah's excitement was audible. They're offering to share their research findings. We would learn about ourselves through their perspective, how human-animal relationships compare to those of other species they've studied, how our emotional bonds function at a biological level, what makes Earth's coevolutionary partnerships unique in the galaxy. President Chen Wei looked skeptical. And we're supposed to trust beings who began this relationship by stealing? Marcus's voice turned hard. They made a mistake. They've acknowledged it and are trying to correct it. That's more than a lot of humans do when they screw up. Secretary General Santos called for a brief recess. In the break, delegates huddled in urgent conversations while the transmission team waited anxiously. When the session resumed, President Walsh spoke first. We've been discussing this among ourselves, and several concerns have emerged. First, how do we verify their compliance with any agreement? Second, what happens if their research reveals information that could be used against us? Third, what's to stop them from extending their stay indefinitely? Sarah had been preparing for these questions. To address your first concern, they need our cooperation to conduct meaningful research. If they violate our agreement, we simply stop cooperating. Their entire research project depends on willing human participants. Regarding your second point, she continued, they're studying emotional bonds and biological relationships, not military capabilities or technological secrets. The information they gather would be more valuable to psychologists and veterinarians than to potential enemies. And for your third concern, they've specified this is for research, purposes with a defined scope. They want to understand human-canine relationships, not establish a permanent presence. Once they have sufficient data, their scientific mission would be complete. President Santos of Brazil raised a hand. Dr. Okafor, you speak as if you trust these beings. But they began by stealing. How do we know this isn't elaborate manipulation? Sarah was quiet for a moment before responding. Because they could have simply ignored our communications. They have superior technology. They could have kept Bailey and continued their research without our input. Instead, they listened to our arguments and modified their approach based on our feedback. That suggests genuine scientific integrity. Prime Minister Clark spoke up. What does Mr. Chen think? This entire situation revolves around his relationship with his pet. Marcus's voice was steady when he answered. Bailey trusts everyone he meets. It's gotten him into trouble before. He once followed a stranger 3 blocks because the guy had a hamburger. But that trust, that openness to connection with other living beings, that's exactly what makes the human-dog bond special. Maybe it's time we showed the same kind of trust. The debate continued for another hour, but gradually a consensus began to emerge. The potential benefits of controlled first contact outweighed the risks, especially given the Vorthak's demonstrated willingness to modify their approach based on human concerns. Finally, Secretary General Santos called for a formal vote. All those in favor of approving the Vorthak research proposal, under the conditions outlined. One by one, hands rose around the table. The vote was unanimous. Mr. Chen, Santos announced, please inform the Vorthak that Earth approves their modified research proposal. We look forward to Bailey's safe return and to humanity's first formal interspecies research partnership. Marcus's relief was audible through the speakers. Thank you, all of you. Bailey's going to be so happy to come home. But as the UN session ended and preparations began for humanity's first alien diplomatic contact, Dr. Okafor couldn't shake a nagging worry. The Vorthak had been surprisingly accommodating, almost eager to modify their research to gain human cooperation. It made her wonder what they really expected to learn from studying the bond between humans and dogs. And more troubling, what they planned to do with that knowledge once they had it. As Earth prepared to welcome its first official alien visitors, none of them realized that the Vorthak Collective was part of a vast galactic civilization, where emotional bonds were considered a dangerous weakness. They weren't just studying human-dog relationships out of academic curiosity. They were trying to understand how such bonds could be weaponized or eliminated. The Vorthak research station materialized in Earth's orbit exactly 72 hours after the UN approval, its crystalline structure catching sunlight like a massive prism against the black of space. From the ground it was visible as a bright star that hadn't been there the day before, a constant reminder that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. Marcus stood in the middle of the same backyard where Bailey had been taken 12 days earlier, surrounded by scientists, military officials, and news crews from around the world. The return ceremony had been planned down to the minute, but Marcus felt like he might collapse from nervous exhaustion. Dr. Okafor stood beside him, monitoring readings from various devices. Atmospheric disturbance increasing, she reported. They're beginning descent. The familiar silver craft descended through the clouds, but this time its approach was different. Slower, more ceremonial. As it settled onto the grass with barely a whisper of displaced air, Marcus could see viewing ports along its hull. The Vorthak were watching this moment as carefully as the humans were. The hull opened like flowing water, and 3 Vorthak emerged. But instead of the clinical efficiency of their first visit, their movement seemed almost hesitant. The lead alien, Marcus had learned his designation was Research Primary Zethkalar, approached with what might have been uncertainty. Human designation Marcus Chen, the voice formed in Marcus's mind, but something was different. The tone seemed less mechanical, more personal. We return your companion creature as agreed. However, we must inform you that the specimen, that Bailey, has experienced significant trauma during his time aboard our vessel. Marcus's heart clenched. What kind of trauma? Is he hurt? Physical damage is minimal. However, his psychological state has deteriorated beyond our initial projections. Despite our efforts to provide appropriate care, he has exhibited persistent distress behaviors. We did not fully comprehend the depth of his attachment to you. The hull opened wider, and a containment field lowered Bailey gently to the ground. Marcus's first sight of his dog sent a shock through his system. Bailey had lost weight, his golden fur was dull and matted, and when he looked around, his usual bright curiosity was replaced by nervous, darting glances. Bailey, Marcus called softly, dropping to his knees. The dog's head snapped toward the familiar voice, and for a moment he stood frozen. Then recognition flooded his brown eyes, and Bailey let out a whine that was part joy, part relief, part accusation. He bounded toward Marcus with a desperation that made every observer understand exactly what the Vorthak had stolen. Marcus wrapped his arms around Bailey's trembling form, and the dog pressed against him as if trying to merge into his body. Bailey's whining was continuous now, a sound of overwhelming emotion as he covered Marcus's face with frantic licks. "I'm here, buddy," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with tears. "I'm here. You're home. You're safe." Zethkalar approached slowly. We did not anticipate the severity of his separation distress. Our research data indicated that pair bonding in mammals was primarily for reproductive purposes or survival advantage. We did not understand that the bond itself could become essential for psychological stability. Dr. Okafor stepped forward, her scientific mind warring with her emotional response to the reunion she was witnessing. "How did you try to care for him?" "We provided optimal nutrition, appropriate temperature and atmospheric conditions, exercise periods, even social interaction with our research staff. By all biological measures, his needs were met." Sarah watched Bailey, who had finally stopped whining but was still pressed against Marcus, as if afraid he might disappear again. "But you couldn't provide the one thing he actually needed, his human." "This was educational for us," Zethkalar admitted. "We have studied biological relationships across 17 different species. We have never encountered a bond that transcends basic survival needs to this degree." Marcus looked up from Bailey, anger flashing in his eyes. "He's not a research subject. He's a living being with feelings and fears and the capacity to love. You treated him like a specimen when he needed to be treated like family." "Yes," Zethkalar said, and the simple agreement startled everyone present. "We have realized our fundamental error. We approached your relationship as if it were merely biological when it is something else entirely." General Hawkins stepped forward. "What do you mean by something else?" The Vorthak's large eyes seemed to shimmer with what might have been confusion or revelation. "In our studies of other species, pair bonds serve specific evolutionary functions. protection, reproduction, resource sharing, but the human-canine bond serves no obvious biological purpose for either species, yet it is stronger than bonds that are essential for survival. Sarah nodded slowly, because it's not just biological. It's emotional, psychological, even spiritual for some people. It's a bond based on choice, not necessity. This concept of choice in bonding is alien to our understanding, Zethkalar continued. Most species bond out of biological imperative, but humans and canines appear to have developed bonds based on affection, companionship. These concepts exist in our language but not in our experience. Marcus stroked Bailey's head, feeling some of the tension leave his dog's muscles. It's love, he said simply. It's not complicated. We love each other. Love. Zethkalar repeated the concept. Our research collective has debated this human emotional concept extensively since beginning our observations. We do not have an equivalent experience. Dr. Wright looked up from his recording equipment. You don't experience love? Any form of emotional attachment? Vorthak relationships are based on logical cooperation for mutual benefit. We form research partnerships, share resources, coordinate survival strategies, but we do not form bonds that persist beyond practical necessity. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. That's why you didn't understand what you were doing to Bailey. You can't imagine caring about someone just because you care about them. Correct. And this presents a significant complication for our research. General Hawkins tensed. What kind of complication? Zethkalar's head tilted in the gesture they'd learned indicated deep thought. Our initial hypothesis was that emotional bonding was an inefficient biological process that more advanced species would evolve beyond. We expected to document the mechanisms of these bonds to understand why some species maintain them, despite their apparent lack of survival value. Marcus held Bailey closer. And now? Now we have observed that Bailey's bond with you is so strong that its disruption caused severe psychological damage. We have witnessed the bond's power to override basic survival instincts. Bailey refused optimal nutrition because he was separated from you. This suggests that these emotional bonds may be more significant than we initially calculated. Sarah's mind was racing. You're saying that love might be evolutionarily advantageous in ways you didn't expect? We are saying that our research has revealed data that contradicts fundamental assumptions about biological efficiency and emotional evolution. This has implications for our understanding of galactic civilization. General Hawkins looked alarmed. What kind of implications? Zethkalar paused for a long moment before responding. The Vorthak Collective is part of a broader galactic community. We were studying emotional bonds to understand why certain species maintain them despite their apparent inefficiency. Our preliminary findings were to be shared with other civilizations to help determine optimal interaction protocols with emotionally bonded species. Marcus looked up sharply. Optimal interaction protocols? What does that mean? It means, Dr. Okafor said quietly, her face pale with realization, that Earth isn't the only planet with emotionally bonded species. And the galactic community has been trying to figure out how to deal with us. Zethkalar's confirmation was chilling. Correct. Species that form emotional bonds are considered unpredictable variables in galactic civilization. Some collective members have advocated for elimination of such species as a stabilizing measure. The weight of this revelation settled over the gathering like a heavy blanket. Bailey, seemingly oblivious to the cosmic implications of his kidnapping, had fallen asleep against Marcus's chest, finally feeling safe enough to rest. But now, Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Now we must report that emotional bonds may represent a survival advantage we do not understand. This will require significant reassessment of galactic policy regarding emotionally bonded species. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the backyard where first contact had begun, humanity realized that Bailey's return was not the end of their story with the Vorthak. It was the beginning of a much larger conflict over the right of emotional beings to exist in a galaxy governed by logic. 3 weeks after Bailey's return, the Vorthak research station had become a permanent fixture in Earth's sky. What had begun as a simple study of human-dog relationships had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. Dr. Sarah Okafor found herself in the unprecedented position of serving as humanity's first interspecies liaison, spending her days in communication with research primary Zethkalar, as both species struggled to understand each other. The Vorthak orbital station was a marvel of technology that made Earth's space program look like children's toys. But as Sarah materialized on the transport platform for her daily research session, she was struck by how sterile everything felt. The corridors were perfectly functional, beautifully designed, and completely devoid of anything that felt like home. Zethkalar waited for her in the main observation chamber, where massive viewing screens showed live feeds of various human-dog pairs around the globe. The images were fascinating. Service dogs guiding their blind partners through busy streets, therapy dogs comforting patients in hospitals, families playing in parks with their pets, military working dogs saving soldiers' lives in combat zones. "Your species continues to surprise us," Zethkalar communicated as Sarah approached. "We have now observed 4,147 individual human-canine pairs across 17 different geographical regions. The variety of bond expressions is remarkable." Sarah studied the screens. "What surprises you most?" "The inefficiency," Zethkalar replied without hesitation. "Humans expend enormous resources caring for creatures that provide no reproductive advantage, limited practical utility, and in many cases, significant financial burden. Yet the bonds persist and even strengthen under adverse conditions." On one screen, Sarah watched an elderly man carefully lifting his arthritic dog into a car for what was obviously a trip to the veterinarian. The tenderness of the gesture, the man's obvious concern for his pet's comfort despite his own physical limitations, encapsulated everything the Vorthak couldn't understand. "It's not inefficient if you measure value differently," Sarah explained. "Humans don't just survive, we thrive through emotional connections. Dogs make us healthier, happier, more complete. That has survival value, just not the kind you're measuring. This is the paradox that concerns our collective leadership," Zethkalar admitted. "Our initial assessment was that emotional bonding represented an evolutionary dead end. Species that waste resources on non-productive attachments should be less successful than those that optimize for efficiency." Sarah felt a chill. "Should be less successful. But we're not. Humans are remarkably successful despite or perhaps because of your emotional bonds. Your species has achieved technological advancement, artistic creativity, and social cooperation levels that correlate positively with emotional bonding strength. This contradicts our fundamental assumptions about evolutionary efficiency." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Your collective thought emotionally bonded species were evolutionary failures. Not failures, anomalies, inefficient variants that natural selection should eliminate. The galactic consensus has been that such species represent instability factors in civilization development. Sarah's mind raced through the terrible logic. So the plan was to eliminate emotionally bonded species to stabilize galactic civilization? Not eliminate. Guide toward more efficient social structures. Remove the biological capacity for inefficient emotional bonding. We have done this successfully with 47 species over the past 3,000 of your years. The casual way Zethkalar delivered this information made Sarah's blood run cold. "You've been removing emotional capacity from entire species? Correcting evolutionary inefficiencies. The process is typically gradual. Introduction of genetic modifications that reduce emotional bonding capacity over several generations. The species becomes more logical, more cooperative with galactic civilization, more stable." Sarah stared at the screens showing humans and dogs living, working, and loving together. "More like you." "Precisely. We believe this represented optimal development for any spacefaring species." "Believed." Past tense. Zethkalar's large eyes seemed to darken. "Your species has presented complications to this model. Humans with strong emotional bonds appear to demonstrate enhanced creativity, improved problem-solving under stress, increased willingness to sacrifice for group benefit, and accelerated technological innovation. These should not be correlated with emotional bonding according to our models." Sarah thought about humanity's greatest achievements: art, music, literature, scientific breakthroughs born from passion and curiosity. Acts of heroism motivated by love rather than logic. "Because you're measuring the wrong things." "Explain." "You're measuring efficiency like it's the only value that matters. But emotional bonds don't just help individuals, they help entire societies. Humans risk their lives to save strangers because we've learned to love beyond our immediate group. We create art and music and stories because we want to share beauty with others. We explore space because we're curious about our place in a larger universe. All of that comes from our capacity for emotional connection. Seth Kalar was quiet for a long moment, processing. You suggest that emotional bonding enhances rather than inhibits societal development? I'm suggesting that maybe your 47 corrected species lost something irreplaceable when you took away their ability to love. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Seth Kalar spoke again. This possibility has created significant discord within the Galactic Collective. Some factions maintain that emotional bonding remains a destabilizing factor that should be eliminated. Others now question whether our previous interventions were errors. Sarah felt the weight of representing her entire species. And where do the Vorthak stand? We are researchers. Our loyalty is to accurate data and logical conclusions. The evidence from your species suggests our previous assumptions were incorrect. However, changing galactic policy based on observation of a single species would be unprecedented. What would it take to change the policy? Seth Kalar's head tilted and the gesture Sarah had learned indicated complex consideration. Demonstration that emotional bonding provides advantages across multiple scenarios. Evidence that emotionally bonded species can coexist peacefully with logical species. Proof that the instability we fear is manageable rather than inevitable. Sarah understood. You need us to prove that love makes us stronger, not weaker. Essentially, yes. But there are complicating factors, such as the collective includes species that view emotional bonding as a direct threat to their social structures. They believe that exposure to emotionally bonded species could destabilize their own civilizations by reintroducing chaotic elements their societies have eliminated. The full scope of the situation crystallized for Sarah. So we're not just fighting for the right to love our dogs? We're fighting for the right of emotional beings to exist in a galaxy that sees us as a virus that might spread. A crude but accurate assessment. Sarah looked at the screens again, watching a child teaching her puppy to sit, a police dog protecting his handler, an old woman finding comfort in her cat's purr. All of it was at risk because a galactic civilization had decided that love was inefficient. Seth Kalar, what happens if the collective decides against us? Standard protocol would be gradual genetic modification to reduce emotional bonding capacity in your species. The process typically takes 3 to 5 generations to complete. And if we refuse? Refusal has never occurred. Modified species typically welcome the changes as they lose the capacity to value what they have lost. Sarah felt sick. You're talking about lobotomizing our souls. We are talking about optimization for galactic integration. Same thing. Sarah stood up, her mind racing. How long do we have? The collective will convene in approximately 6 of your months to review our research findings and determine policy regarding emotionally bonded species. Our recommendation will significantly influence their decision. 6 months to prove that love was worth preserving. 6 months to demonstrate that emotional bonds made species stronger, not weaker. 6 months to save not just humanity, but every emotionally capable species in the galaxy. As Sarah prepared to return to Earth, she realized that Bailey's kidnapping had been more than just theft. It had been humanity's first and possibly last chance to prove their worth to a galaxy that had already decided emotional beings were evolutionary mistakes to be corrected. The war for the right to love had begun, and humanity didn't even know they were fighting it. The world had changed in ways both visible and invisible during the 6 months since Bailey's return. The Vorthak research station remained a constant presence in the sky, but now everyone knew what it represented, not just scientific curiosity, but a test that would determine humanity's future. Marcus Chen stood in the same backyard where everything had started, but now it was transformed into something resembling mission control. Banks of monitors showed live feeds from around the globe. Communication arrays maintained constant contact with the orbital station, and some of the world's brightest minds worked frantically to compile evidence that emotional bonds made species stronger. Bailey, fully recovered from his ordeal, lay in the afternoon sun, occasionally lifting his head to watch the activity with mild interest. He had no idea that his kidnapping had triggered a chain of events that would determine whether love itself could survive in the galaxy. Dr. Sarah Okafor approached Marcus. her face showing the strain of 6 months spent as humanity's advocate to an alien collective. "The final presentation is in 3 hours," she said quietly. Marcus nodded, absently stroking Bailey's head. "Are we ready?" "As ready as we can be. We've documented everything. Military units with canine partners showing superior performance, therapy animals reducing PTSD symptoms, the correlation between pet ownership and community stability, the role of emotional bonds in human innovation and creativity. Will it be enough?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. We're asking them to overturn thousands of years of galactic policy based on what they see as emotional bias." Dr. Wright looked up from his console. "Incoming transmission from the station. It's Seth Kalar." The familiar voice formed in their minds, but something was different, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Dr. Okafor, Marcus Chen. We must speak urgently. There have been developments within the collective." Sarah activated the communication array. "What kind of developments?" "Opposition factions have presented alternative evidence to the collective leadership. They argue that your species' emotional bonds make you inherently dangerous to galactic stability." Marcus felt a chill. "What kind of evidence?" "Historical analysis of human warfare, documentation of crimes committed in the name of love, examples of irrational behavior driven by emotional attachment. They present humans as a species whose bonds lead to violence and unpredictability." Sarah closed her eyes. Of course, someone would weaponize humanity's capacity for both love and hate. "And their recommendation?" "Immediate intervention. Complete suppression of human emotional bonding capacity within 1 generation. They argue that your species represents an existential threat to galactic peace. The weight of impending judgment settled over the group. 6 months of preparation, and it might all be meaningless because humans had the capacity for both great love and terrible hatred." Marcus stood up abruptly. "I want to address the collective directly." Sarah stared at him. "Marcus, this isn't something you can just... Bailey was stolen because of our bond. This whole situation started because I refused to let him go. If it's going to end, it should end with me explaining why that bond is worth saving." General Hawkins, who had been monitoring from Washington, spoke through the comm system. "Mr. Chen, the collective includes species with vastly different psychology and communication methods. We need trained diplomats for this. You need someone who understands what we're fighting for," Marcus replied firmly. "Send all the diplomats you want, but Bailey and I are going to speak for ourselves." Seth Kalar's voice carried what might have been surprise. "You wish to address the collective in person?" "If you can transport me to wherever this meeting is happening, yes. The collective convenes on the neutral station at Galactic Sector 7 Alpha. The journey would require approximately 47 of your standard hours." Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "You can't be serious. You'd be completely alone. Light years. From Earth. Speaking to alien species we know nothing about." Marcus looked down at Bailey, who had risen and was pressing against his leg with the intuitive understanding that his human was preparing for something important. Bailey trusted the aliens when they first arrived because he trusts all living things. Maybe it's time I showed the same kind of trust. "This is insane," General Hawkins protested through the comm. "We can't risk sending a civilian into unknown alien territory." "Then send Dr. Okafor too," Marcus said. "But I'm going whether you approve it or not. This started with me and Bailey, and that's how it's going to end." 3 hours later, Marcus found himself aboard a Vorthak transport vessel, traveling faster than light toward a destination he couldn't even conceptualize. Bailey sat beside him, surprisingly calm for a dog who had been traumatized by his previous alien encounter. Sarah sat across from them, reviewing her notes one final time. Seth Kalar had provided them with translation devices and briefed them on the collective's composition. 17 different species, each representing vastly different evolutionary paths and philosophical approaches to civilization. Some were hive minds, others were solitary beings who rarely interacted even with their own kind. Some communicated through electromagnetic pulses, others through chemical exchanges. "Remember," Seth Kalar advised as they approached the neutral station, Many of these species view emotional bonding as a form of mental illness. They will not understand why you risk everything for one animal. Then I'll help them understand, Marcus replied. The neutral station was a massive structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its architecture defying human comprehension. Marcus and Bailey were escorted through corridors filled with beings that looked like living crystals, sentient gas clouds, metallic constructs with multiple manipulator arms, and creatures that existed partially in visible light and partially in something else entirely. The main chamber was a sphere with no defined floor or ceiling, where the 17 species of the collective arranged themselves according to their physical needs. Marcus found himself standing on a platform that materialized beneath his feet, facing entities that represented cosmic civilization. The proceedings began with the opposition faction presenting their case against humanity. They displayed images of human wars, crimes of passion, genocides committed in the name of tribal loyalty, environmental destruction driven by short-term emotional thinking. Their argument was clinical and devastating. Emotional bonds made species dangerous and unpredictable. Then it was humanity's turn. Sarah presented their carefully compiled evidence with scientific precision, demonstrating the positive correlations between emotional bonding and social advancement. She showed how human creativity, innovation, and cooperation were enhanced by emotional connections, not hindered by them. But when she finished, Marcus could sense that the collective remained unconvinced. The evidence was compelling, but it was still just data. Marcus stood and looked around at the assembled beings. "I don't know how to speak to cosmic civilizations," he began. "I'm just a guy who loves his dog, but maybe that's exactly why I should be the one talking to you." He gestured to Bailey, who sat calmly beside him despite being surrounded by incomprehensible alien entities. "This is Bailey. He's not particularly smart or special or useful by your standards. He can't solve complex equations or contribute to technological advancement or help expand civilization across the galaxy. All he does is love." Marcus's voice grew stronger. 6 months ago when you took him, I could have been logical about it. I could have accepted that he was gone and moved on with my life. It would have been efficient, practical, reasonable. But I didn't, because efficiency isn't the only value that matters. He knelt down and scratched behind Bailey's ears, and the dog's tail wagged with pure contentment. "Bailey loves me not because I'm useful to him, but because I'm me. I love Bailey not because he serves a practical purpose, but because he's him. That kind of love. Love without conditions, love without logic, love that exists just because it exists. That's what you're trying to eliminate from the galaxy." Marcus stood again, facing the collective. "You've presented evidence that emotional bonds can lead to violence and irrationality. You're right. Humans have done terrible things in the name of love. But we've also done incredible things. We've sacrificed our lives for strangers, created beauty for no practical reason, explored the unknown because we were curious about our place in the universe. We've built civilizations based on the idea that every individual has value just because they exist." The chamber was completely silent as Marcus continued. "You see emotional bonds as inefficiency, but they're actually the opposite. They're the most efficient way to create meaning. Bailey doesn't love me because it benefits him. He loves me because that's what he is, a creature capable of love. And that makes him valuable in a way that no logical calculation can measure." Marcus paused, looking around at beings whose thought processes he couldn't begin to understand. "You want to eliminate emotional bonding to create a more stable galaxy. But what's the point of stability if you remove everything that makes existence meaningful? What's the point of surviving if you can't love?" He gestured to the assembled collective. "Look around this chamber. You've created a galactic civilization based on logic and efficiency. You've eliminated waste, optimized resource allocation, HE,